Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the most exciting committee at City Hall. I will note that I have failed as chair in that there is no member of the media present, and they keep saying that they would actually show up, and I'm quite disappointed, so I'm calling them out on that. To my committee members, welcome, and I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest at this time. Seeing none, we'll turn directly to items for direction, and our friends from Deloitte are here. And so we have actually five items on the agenda. We'll start with the internal summary, and I'll look to the committee. I assume all of you have read it. Any questions on that? Okay, then if there isn't anything or anything that Deloitte feels that needs to be highlighted, we're all good. I'll take a motion on item number one. The motion is to receive it. That's Councillor Turner, and Councillor Hopkins is seconding it. Any discussion? I have one question, if I could, from the chair. Item C on the dashboard, can you just tell me what we're doing when it says continues to work with management to improve performance metrics for finalizing internal audit reports? What do you mean? What does that refer to?
That would be in terms of the closing meeting time, going over the observations, as well as looking at the recommendations and management action plans, looking for a more efficient way and consistently improving upon our performance to make sure we're meeting expectations as well.
All right, Michael.
Thank you. So there were a number of observations that were past due, and I see that we've got a revised timeline for those. So I'm just have a question through the chair to our staff. Does it look like we'll meet those revised timelines?
Mr. Collins?
With respect to the cash handling policy, that has gone past what we had anticipated it to be completed at. We've had a major system implementation that has that has channeled a lot of our resources to that avenue. That system implementation went live 2 Mondays ago. So we're looking to refocus our resources to accomplishing and getting this one issue off of our plate.
Okay, thank you. And I turned 2 pages at once, so I think I got too far ahead. So.
Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. We will turn to item number 4.2, which is the observation summary, which is really quite similar. And this is really looking at where we're at to date. This page. And it really is the same, really the same thing. Anything further on that, Anise?
Yeah, the one item is the Freedom of Information Process Assessment. Those open observations have been closed. Management implemented the last implementation plan prior to this meeting. We were able to review the information and test it accordingly. I'm so happy to report it's closed.
And the clerks had a few things on their plate in the last month to deal with, so good to have that closed. I'll take a motion to receive that. Van Hulst and Turner seconding. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed. Thank you very much. To page 5 on the agenda, which is the dashboard, the internal audit dashboard. You will see on that we're going to be dealing with homeless prevention assessment and procurement process assessment, which are complete. In the hopper right now, our IT portfolio management and project management assessment, which is 80% complete. And then the others are really just in their initial scoping stage. Any further comments, Jim or Anissa? No? Questions from the committee? Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Your Worship. No. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you.
Just with respect to the timing, so these project status is for the 2017-18 internal audit plan. A couple of the items are moving into fiscal 2019. I'd imagine it looks like those activities are anticipated to be, I guess, what are we putting in deeper into 2019? Of these projects that were 2018 plan pieces, and does that have any material impact on the audit plan for 2019?
So in terms of the 2019 plan, there will be a few of these reviews that'll carry over into that year. And also our hope would be is that we can have discussions with management as well as the audit committee to look at the projects that would be included in the 2019-2020 plan to see if what we had originally scoped should still be in scope. If not, let's look at what the new risks are and include different projects in the plan.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So just thank you for that. Would you anticipate with these, what's held over, that there would be any reduction in capacity for the 2019 audit plan in order to accomplish and accommodate these, or would we be able to complete what we might anticipate to be done in 19 plus what's carried over?
In terms of answering that question, I think there would be minimal impact. The field work is underway for majority of these projects. So if anything, it would be the wrapping up of the reporting and issuing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anything else? Michael?
Thank you. Looks like on the project customer satisfaction, that was scored very well. But I just wonder if there was, were there particular comments associated with maybe something less than 5 stars that might be worth noting?
No, there wouldn't be any comments that have come back. I mean, the 2 improvement areas are to consistently ensure that communication is continuous with management, as well as looking at improving our performance metrics for finalization of reports.
Just a question, who gets that survey? Is it just one per engagement, or is it all the people that were involved in the engagement? So for example, if we were to look at the procurement one that we're going to look at later, there's quite a list of people that were involved. Do they all get a copy of the survey to contribute, or is it just the lead manager, or who gets it?
It would be the lead manager involved, so directly the auditee, and the hope and expectation would be that they would have discussions with their team to ensure that all feedback is provided and then sent in one response.
Okay, thank you. Anna?
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, I do have a quick question about the housing process assessment. I know we're just starting that. Could you elaborate a little bit as to what does that encompass when you talk about housing and what that assessment looks at?
So in terms of the scope for the housing review, we were looking at the governance frameworks that are in place, as well as the financial management controls, and also looking at some of the system items as well that feeds into housing.
Just one other thing on the evaluation. Is it qualitative or just quantitative?
There's a ranking from 1 to 5, quantitative, and then a summary box that would allow you to include the qualitative comments.
I'll take a motion to receive. Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Samit. All in favor? Okay, any opposed? None opposed. Okay, so we have 2 assessments today. One is in procurement, second one's in homeless area. Let's start with the procurement. Do you want to walk us through?
Sure. So in terms of the procurement process assessment, we conducted the field work within that review from July to September. And the scope of that review specifically looked at the governance framework and organizational structure around purchasing and supplies. We also looked at the purchasing and supply section business processes and any key relevant business controls. We looked at the effectiveness of those controls, especially in regards to e-procurement, which had recently been implemented. And we also looked at reviewing and identifying any improvement opportunities accordingly within those processes. So in terms of the review, we did identify 2 medium priority observations, 2 low and 1 leading practice. So we'll spend time looking at the medium priority items. If I can direct your attention to page 11 of the report. The first observation was in regards to vendor management. And what we identified was that there was a few themes in regards to vendor management that needed some improvement. One being around the supplier inventory. There's been multiple addresses for the same vendor in the system modules. We also identified that that there were information that would potentially be stored around non-financial information around the performance results that needed to be reviewed accordingly. And then also from a guideline perspective, there was a need to provide further supporting guidelines for management and staff to better understand practices for executing any vendor performance evaluations as well. So our recommendation here was that management should consider opportunities to reduce the number of addresses per vendors in the master file, as well as be able to look at the types of information that are being stored, as well as provide further supporting guidelines to improve the vendor management process. You want to walk through all of them? Okay.
If I may ask a question, just regarding multiple addresses, is this a matter of somebody moving and we've got a legacy address on there, or is there a reason that we would have multiple addresses for vendors? They may have multiple locations. I don't know. I just wanted some clarification there.
Through the chair to the committee, there are instances whether indeed there are multiple addresses for a single vendor. Plus, we also incorporate payment terms depending on the contract. There may be different payment terms associated with whatever contract we enter into. So we then create different addresses based on the actual address of the vendor as well as the payment terms related to that contract.
Okay, carry on.
Would you like me to walk through all observations or just the medium priorities?
My preference, look to the committee, would be to walk through all of them and then we can ask our questions, if that's okay.
I think the recommendation was to either go through the identified priorities or go through the entire thing. Is that what the request was, rather than so do just the priorities at once, which we've read through the report.
Yeah, we can do the priorities at once.
Yeah.
So the front page.
Okay, so then the next item I draw your attention to is page 6. The medium priority would be around file retention and maintenance. Here we're looking at there needed to be some improvement around the file maintenance practices because it could vary based on the documentation that was within given files. There was some inconsistency, so the recommendation there was that management should enhance that operating guideline to ensure that there's clarity around what the file retention process should be. And those would be the key priority observations within the report.
Questions? Councillor Turner.
Thanks, through you, Mr. Chair. There's the recommendations. It recognizes strong managements in the e-procurement realm, but then goes on to talk about some challenges with respect to manual signings of invoices and things like that. Those seem like processes that would be somewhat linked, having electronic procurement processes and electronic sign-off processes on those. Is that something that the software for e-procurement has the capacity of doing and it just hasn't been implemented yet, or do we need a fully separate system in order to do so?
Mr. Freeman?
Through the chair, the e-procurement package that we use is for soliciting and receiving bids. The signing off and approving of invoices, et cetera, is outside of that. They are additional financial processes, and so therefore there's not an ability to link them. Any documents certainly coming in by e-procurement, such as bonding, et cetera, is all done in a digital format.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I misunderstood. So the procurement process is all kind of through the tendering process, wholly separate thing. In terms of identifying solutions that that can do electronic sign-offs for purchases and invoices, is that something that's in the hopper, or is that something that needs to be completely developed at this point?
Go ahead.
Through the chairs, this is something that, because it would be a corporate-wide impact, we have talked about. It is not identified as a priority at this time, just because we know that there are other municipalities that are testing it. There have been some platforms that have been identified. So, and there's a whole bunch of other pieces that have been identified that are processed. There are legal implications and other things that we're still trying to assess. So it's on the horizon. We are looking at it, but we haven't identified it as a priority to look at in the next year, just given all of the other things that are on our plate at this time. But we are monitoring what other municipalities are doing and looking at it. So it is something that eventually will form a priority. We just haven't gone there yet, given the other commitments.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, to Deloitte, you identify this as a low risk. So would you agree with that assessment and timeline that it's appropriate to, or is this something that that should be accelerated, given the size of the corporation and the numerous purchases that do go on? Paper signatures must be really challenging to audit, I'd imagine.
So we did identify it as more of a leading practice for the city to take a look at. There are different risks that tie to being able to go electronic signature. Apart from just the authorization piece, there's a legality risk that ties to that as well. And that's where the recommendation came through. It should be something that should be identified, but also look to see what other local governments are doing as well, and learn if there's any shortcomings or areas where the city could improve upon it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Turner's questions were right on to my curiosity about the process moving forward on approvals and signatures and how that would look like. And we've just heard that I'm glad that we're looking at other municipalities, and it's not a priority at the moment. So appreciate those comments, even though it is low right now. We should be looking at it, I guess, in the near future. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. So I appreciate staff's response on this one. I think it's a good strategy for us not to pioneer things that don't have a strong first mover advantage. So somebody else can experiment with something and work the bugs out. That's great. If it's not going to mean a big advantage to us. And just for some context, perhaps I could ask about, I'm sure there's some security risks to electronic signatures as well. Perhaps you could just briefly describe that.
I can talk to that. Yeah, I think that there's a trade-off as well. To your point, you want to be leading edge, not bleeding edge. So you want to look at what the security risk would be. And there's obviously, when you go to electronic signatures, there's effort that is required to ensure that only certain individuals can actually execute those signatures. So it's another layer of security that would need to be added, and potentially would impact a lot of employees of the city that, there's definitely benefits in the process when you look at it in isolation, but there's added overhead with the electronic signatures as well that you need to look at and balance.
Thank you.
Sumit?
Looking at the vendor management commentary, I'm just curious if there's any data that you could provide to us I can assume that the reason that this is being provided is either A, duplicate payments, and either having to finagle back with some vendors, and then all the time that's lost. So is there any data you can provide on how much either time saving this might provide to us, and maybe just how big this vendor list is to have that type of a timeline?
I think from a timing issue, I would say it wouldn't necessarily be timing. It would be more from an efficiency and effectiveness in the sense of it is leading practice, best practice to be reviewing your vendor master file at least on an annual basis to ensure that the vendors that are included are accurate and that you're comfortable. And it also helps you with the evaluation process as well to see if there are certain vendors you still want to continue with. And if not, starting those conversations also. So it is more of a best practice and something that should be done across any organization.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone finished? I have one further question. I guess the question I have is, was there any value for money opportunities discovered? And secondly, and connected to that, what's the sort of cost benefit? In other words, to implement these recommendations, what will it cost in terms of either dollars and cents or staff time versus the benefit? And so you can reduce the risk to absolutely zero risk, and then what's the benefit and how would we measure that?
Yeah, I don't think we measured the cost benefit in these cases, but certainly there's a consideration that management would need to undertake when they look at the different options. And I think to the point around the electronic signatures, for example, I don't think you can ever eliminate the risks. The risks just change. And it's meant, some of the comments are meant to improve the efficiency of the process, reducing the amount of paper and improving the workflow. And it may not, in fact, have a big impact on in some cases may not have an impact on the cost, may just improve service delivery. So more from a value for money perspective, improving the, the payment stream and response to vendors and that sort of thing. Does that?
I was just going to add, from a value for money perspective, I think management had gone through that type of discussion when they had determined to implement the e-procurement piece, especially around the tenders and the bidding, to understand what value making those changes to the system would add, and also the ability to redirect management time and staff time to focus on other areas.
John, do you want to make any further comment in that respect?
So through the chair, to the chair, is this a value for money? Is that what you're asking for further comment on?
Well, yeah, when we look at audit, I mean, our focus has been much more on process and risk management and controls, but there is still an element. Do we want to be looking for value for money? And the value for money comes in a couple of different ways. One, we save it because we don't spend it, but also we do more with the resources that we have. But also when you're looking at things from a risk management point of view, often it requires more resources to reduce the risk. In other words, there has to be another set of eyes or another set of hands, or there's another process that takes time, and time equals money. So that's where the cost benefit. And so before we just sort of go, yeah, let's do this, we need to think about, does that make sense? And are we reducing a risk from a 5% probability to a 0% probability? And it's not a linear, it's an exponential. So it takes a lot more to reduce a risk in the upper 10 percentile than it does in the lower 60 percentile. If I was to use percentile, well, I shouldn't use percentiles, but anyhow. But you get what I'm saying. Depending on where you are on better to talk standard deviations, actually. But so I'm not going to geek out too far here. But the more you get towards the finer ends of your normal curve, the more effort it takes to close that gap. And that's expensive effort. So that's how I'm asking the question. That's probably a longer answer than you asked for, but go ahead, Sean.
In general, I agree with the results of the audit, and I understand clearly what you're asking for. And certainly 1.01, the vendor management is by far the largest amount of effort that we would have to put forth. Certainly the first piece is understanding the multiple address books in our enterprise system and what can we do to try and consolidate them or try and create maybe a child-parent relationship so that we can sum up to a higher level with the vendor levels. And then we can start to look into the performance management of them. We do vendor performance management today. We do it very actively with a lot of our construction projects. It's something we've been doing the last few years, and we started small, and we're doing pretty much all of the contractors on a regular annual basis. And I think that process has been very good for letting people know that, hey, we're watching you. It doesn't mean that just because you were low bid and you're awarded the contract that you're going to get paid. You still have to deliver quality delivery cost and service to the City of London. That's an expectation. So again, as you talk standard deviation, going out to the finite levels, down through your spend, A, B, C to the lower dollar values. Yes, the effort, you get to a point in time where you have to say, have we Paretoed it? Have we got 80% now of the spend for the city? And are we managing that under supplier performance management? So that's going to take some evaluation as we work through this. It's multiple phases. We don't have a full-blown supplier development group at the city as some organizations would have in the private sector. So we have to balance the value for money of the staffing that we have on hand and determine where the best value of tax dollars are spent to manage this. So hopefully that tries to clarify things for you.
That's a helpful commentary, just scope it out that way. Michael?
Thank you. That's a good line of questioning. You approach diminishing returns, and then you would wonder, is there a way for staff to come back to us and just say, this little extra little bit wasn't worth it? So that would certainly be welcome from my perspective, if that's what you find, and say so.
I'd like to acknowledge that there have been some low-hanging value for money added work that has been done that Deloitte has acknowledged in their report. If you look to page 1 of their report on procurement, they identified the shift that the corporation made with the approval of tenders greater than $3 million, making that administrative. So that turned out to save time on administration side in terms of building reports. And then building on what Ines had said earlier with respect to e-procurement, we tightened up some of the controls to prevent additional staff time spent walking through the process with proponents to our bids and tenders coming in. E-procurement actually walks through the bidder with gates in place to ensure that their bid is 100% complete, so that we're not going back and forth with the proponent. So we kind of already addressed some of the low-hanging fruit.
If we could turn now to homeless.
Sure, so if I can draw your attention to page 23 in terms of the package. So Deloitte performed the review of the homeless prevention assessment from April to July. The scope of the review specifically focused on the homeless prevention system implementation plan, the governance framework, as well as monitoring and performance metrics that are in place. We also looked at the financial processes, guidelines, and controls within the system, and we also spent time looking at assessing the homeless prevention system contract, ensuring that there was subsequent monitoring of contracts accordingly. So within this review, we'll spend time looking at the 4 medium priority observations. So if I can now draw your attention to page 27 within the package. The first observation is in regards to a homeless prevention dashboard. We had identified that there currently is no dashboard in place to measure the status of each homeless prevention area in aggregate. So the recommendation here is to implement some form of dashboard or scorecard that would allow management to, on a regular basis, measure, assess, and track the plan progress. Okay. Okay. The next observation is on page 28, which is the priority assessment and funding allocation. So with this observation, what we identified is that analysis and rationale to support priority and funding allocation decisions is currently not documented using a standardized format. So management does document their rationale, but there could be different ways of documenting it accordingly. So that's where here we're just recommending that there should be a standard way of being able to document decisions that are made and in terms of management recording them. The next observation is around the service delivery model. Here, what we're looking at around service delivery is that feedback is not consistently measured and existing performance indicators are not regularly tracked and monitored. So the recommendation here is to just formalize the service delivery performance management program and just to ensure that there is regular measurement as well as interpreting and assessing the effectiveness also. And the final medium priority observation is around standard operating procedures. So here we are just recommending that management further document certain guidelines that are in place, and we've listed those 4 items, and the recommendation is just to document them and then, as always, continually monitor them and change them accordingly.
Thank you for that. So I think there's a number of things here that we should talk about, but I think it might be good to understand perhaps the context in which this is happening, because if you just sort of do a deep dive into sort of the recommendations, it shows a certain picture, but it's in the context of a really emerging and developing area. So if I could, I might just turn to Ms. Livingston and maybe just back us up from a committee and describe what the journey has been in terms of our the development of our homeless program and our strategy and where that's headed, if you might, Lynn.
Through the chair, we would describe the homeless prevention system as one that is immature. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we didn't have something called a system. We had our first plan back in 2013 and have been trying to work together as a community towards the implementation of that plan and working more as a system. So I think some of where we are reflects that state of maturity. We would note that, and I believe the report notes it as a strength, that one of the key things that will help us move forward is the recent introduction of our information system, which I don't believe there's another example in Canada where it is a shared information system amongst organizations, 13 organizations, including the city, where data is shared in real time. And so we believe that will be a game changer to help us move forward more rapidly in terms of actually having a mature and highly operating system in place. So I think that just gives you, to answer your question, Chair, that gives you a sense of where we believe we've come from and where we're at right now.
Thank you for that. I think that helps us with a little bit of context. I'll look to committee for Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, and thank you for that explanation too, because my first question was, what is a mature control environment look like? So I know we've come from an immature environment and we're going into a mature control system. Thank you for the report. I found it very informative as well. I do have a quick question about the scoreboard and the dashboard and the implementation of that. And are there timelines around that, or is it something that is to be determined?
So from our discussions with management, there has been a timing provided of September 30th, 2019, to be able to have that implemented.
If I could, to Ms. Livingston to add to that.
Through the chair, I just want to provide the context on the timeline. So we have an obligation to provide an updated 5-year homeless prevention and housing plan. That has to be done by next June. We would then move to institute a number of the recommendations that are here against that new plan, including having the dashboard in place, the appropriate metrics, hence why you see a September timeframe for that particular recommendation.
Okay, Samit?
Thanks. I think that helped clarify all the timelines that are listed here. I was hoping just for some additional color on the dashboard. Is that something that this system, it's a module, or is this something that has to be built from scratch? Is it something that's going to be in an external system and you're just using the data as the output? So just some more color on what that dashboard might look like.
Through the chair, we have some existing dashboards in place for components of our program. For example, we have a dashboard for our homeless prevention housing allowances. What this recommendation is about, if I understand it correctly, is a dashboard against our entire plan and the metrics. We will have to create that. It is not a component of the information system. The information system will provide us important information to help monitor and measure, but it won't produce the dashboard. We're unaware of a dashboard for homeless prevention in Canada at this time. We know this is something the sector is talking about in terms of something that's actually meaningful. I mean, you can create a dashboard for anything. That's not hard. It's trying to create something that's meaningful. So we'll be using the time while the plan's being developed to look at what the best model or mechanism might be for us.
Thank you. And through you. So the three identified areas in this talk about the potential for one, that the city might be aware of on events that could affect homeless prevention objectives and desired outcomes. And then the other two talk about the risk that that there's no that the consistency isn't there in the application of that framework for funding allocation or service delivery. So that's from a process side, and I recognize that was the objective of the audit. Is there any evidence that the application actually resulted in hypervariability or a breadth of variability in those assessments or processes?
No, that wouldn't have been identified.
And through you, I guess, to staff, do you have concerns about that, or do you feel that that these are being applied relatively consistently across the program and across those who are our service providers?
Through the chair, I would just like to remind the committee that we also work with 3 funders. So we have 3 different sets of obligations that we need to meet when we report, and they get reflected in our contracts and relationship with those that we have a funding arrangement with. We also have a process that we use internally around how funding recommendations are made and decided upon. Can that process be improved? Of course. So I think we feel that what we've said needs to happen in the plan gets reflected through our funding contracts within the confines of the funding arrangements we have with our individual funders. Is that what you were asking? Sorry.
Thank you. I guess generally, are you comfortable that there's a general consistency in the application? The process side says there's the risk of that, but in practice, does it come out relatively consistently in the provision of services?
I think a simple answer would be yes to that.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. So in terms of our system, I really like your description of that. It seems like we're using a smart city approach, and there's also some collaboration, which was one of our values in the strategic plan, and has worked out really well in some things, such as mentioned in here, community and drug alcohol strategy, where we've got 30 organizations all trying to figure out what are you doing, and work together towards something. So maybe the question I'd like to ask, just to encourage us, is how will this help us better solve the problem of homelessness?
Thank you, and through the chair. I think I'd like to answer that in two ways. The first is from a system-wide approach. We have to look at what we want to measure and then making sure we have the data to measure it accurately. And so we will be able to move forward to look at who are the homeless and also look at what their defining characteristics are. How many are chronically homeless? How many are new to the experience of homelessness, for two examples, and then be better able to track the resources and the allocation to them. So it's just a simple example, but the second and more important part of how we're going to solve homelessness is looking at the needs of one individual by name at a time. If you will, right now, we have 13 programs, well, 12 programs, because one program is the City of London, who will often see the same individual in each of their organizations, do the same intake, identify them as theirs, and not in any way share about what the unique needs are of that individual. So by collapsing the 13 into one, we take one look at that individual, one intake, and are able to identify where he or she or who, whatever they identify as, in the system and what their needs are. So to me, there's two very important elements, the macro level and what is happening for that individual to ensure that we have the right resources at the right time in real time. They're not waiting till next week to find out about a housing solution for this individual. We're going to work on that today. And that, to me, is the significant game changer that we've spent a year doing. I will also just say, just out of respect to the programs that have participated, they had to tear down their existing database in order to put a brand new one in. And they also had to agree to a shared consent. So they're using one consent that meets the needs of all. This is significant collaboration, and I've just returned from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness Conference where we were featured as, I don't just say wow, about being able to have organizations agree to come together to actually deliver. And I really very firmly believe that the next few years we are going to see wow in the results of the data. And I'm very excited about where we go with that. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that answer. That's good. And congratulations on all of that. Your term game changer, I think was significant. Having a number of years ago taken part in the poverty simulation, which was kind of a game that's played where you have to go to all of those organizations to try to make things happen. And once you sort of get that worked out, you're throwing a curveball that all of a sudden you drop your mobility or aren't able to make something and that's the challenge people have. So we're taking, it's not so much making it easier for us, which it is, but that will make it substantially easy for the people that have to access those systems, because it is a tremendous challenge. It's a full-time job to be poor or, live in poverty.
Anything further? I just want to say that I think I first encountered the discussion of homelessness in 1981 or 82, and I was working at Queen Street Mental Health Center, and I was working in Parkdale, and in the subsequent, and I've lost how many count of years that would be, and in different sectors, the ability to get a common shared information is relatively unheard of. And that access, if I could use that word, to that information is often the power lever that, you know, protects agencies but doesn't help clients. And I'm sort of thinking off the top of my head here. So while this is an audit, and an audit of an area that's emerging, I think there's some good things to be on the horizon to be looking for that will increase its, and I like the word maturity as an area. The strides that have been made are very significant in terms of service delivery. And I have to say as well, that I don't think I can recall a municipal election campaign where homelessness and issues of poverty have been more front and center and bubbling up through all candidates' meetings, not just in certain areas of the city, but certainly ones that were in Ward 8 and Ward 7 and across the city where they might not have been in the past. So I know we're out a little bit outside of the scope of what is, and I won't ask exactly the same questions that I asked of the procurement one, because I think we have the issue of process and outcome. And we have, how do we measure outcome? And how do we have the right processes in place to ensure that we can measure the right outcome? But then also, how do we have the right processes in place so that we achieve the right outcome? And those are sometimes different things. It's about, so I look at this from a grassroots kind of frontline person back when I was younger and didn't have a beard like Sumit and I have. Turner, you need to bring the beard back so you can just fit in, you know? But also from a program evaluation perspective, and how do we do that in a meaningful way? So I think there's some really good things in here that I look forward to seeing how that rolls out in the new plan. But I think also it demonstrates a commitment throughout the corporation, not just as a service deliverer, to make sure that we do what we need to do and do it well. So with that, I'll take a motion on this. Councillor Van Holst and Councillor Hopkins seconding it. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay. Thank you very much. Any deferred matters? Any additional business? I have one piece. So we are going to go in camera in just a second. We're going to go across to committee room number 3. This is after 12 years, my last audit committee. So for those of you who have endured me for 12 years, I thank you. And we have our friends from KPMG here as well today. Thank you for your good work. And I know you'll be back on with an audit plan. Thank you, Jen, in the new year. And to our friends from Deloitte, good to have you on board. And to staff, it's been a slice. We've looked at a lot of areas. This was, and Sharon, I think you've been here for the whole cruise almost, but a typical audit committee, if I may, meeting in 2007 would last about 35 minutes. And members would be really upset if it went much longer than that. It was at 8 or 8:30 in the morning, and it was perfunctory. We do not have a perfunctory audit function anymore. We have a very robust external audit, and we have a very robust internal audit that goes along hand in glove with service review and lean and business planning internally. So I'm delighted to see how far it's come in the last dozen years. And to those who are no longer with the corporation, people like Tom Johnson and Nora and all that, it's been quite a cruise. So thank you all for your work. I'll take a motion to go in camera at this. And I have to say in public, this will be Sumit's last meeting as well. He's informed me that he's not going to be seeking to come back. You have done an outstanding job, and you have really contributed robustly in your questions and your knowledge and your insights. So we thank you. You do this as a volunteer, and your commitment has been really well received and very much appreciated. And I know there's still time to change your mind. I just want you to know. All three of these people are coming back to council, whether they're on audit committee or not, but your wisdom would be most welcome around the table. So thank you very much. With that, I'll take a motion from Sumit to go in camera. Okay, and seconded by Councillor Turner. All in favor? Okay, we'll be across the hall. And we'll be adjourning from across the hall as well.